I was 22 when Grandpa passed, and the funeral hit me harder than I let on to anyone. Folks gathered at the little white church down in Blackthorn Hollow, the one with the steeple that leans a hair to the left ever since the '72 flood. They said he went quiet in his sleep, heart finally given up after years of stubborn beating. But I knew the truth. He'd been fading since Grandma died a decade earlier. After she was gone, he took to wandering the ridges at night, coming home at dawn with pine needles in his hair and stories about the mountains whispering secrets only he could hear. Mom called it grief. I called it Grandpa. The family buried him next to her under a dogwood that blooms pink every spring. And then everyone packed up their casseroles and condolences and headed back to Knoxville or Asheville or wherever they'd come from. I couldn't leave, not yet. The hollow felt like the only place still holding pieces of him, so I told Mom I'd stay a few days, hike the trails he loved, maybe scatter a pinch of his ashes where the creek bends around the big boulder he used to fish from. She hugged me too tight, eyes wet, and said, "Be careful up there, honey. The ridge don't forgive fools." I laughed it off, but her words stuck like burrs. I set out the next morning with his old canvas pack slung over one shoulder. Inside, a thermos of coffee already turning lukewarm, a peanut butter sandwich in wax paper. His trail map folded so many times, the creases felt like braille under my fingers. The path up Blackthorn Ridge started gentle, gravel crunching under my boots, sunlight filtering through the canopy and dusty shafts, the smell of damp earth and hemlock thick enough to chew. Grandpa called this stretch the breathing trail, said the mountain inhaled come morning, exhaled at night, and if you listened close, you could feel its lungs working. I'd rolled my eyes as a kid, but now, with every step pulling me deeper into the green, it didn't sound so foolish. The air grew cooler, thinner, carrying that sharp pine tang that stings the back of your throat. Rhododendrons crowded the edges, their waxy leaves brushing my arms like cold fingers. By the time I hit the first switchback, the one Grandpa marked with a cairn of smooth river stones, I'd worked up a good sweat. I added my own stone to the pile, a flat gray one I'd pocketed down by the creek, and whispered his name into the wind. Nothing answered but the rustle of leaves. The ridge narrowed after that, pines giving way to laurel thickets that clawed at my jeans. I stopped to sip coffee, leaning against a birch whose bark peeled in curly strips. That's when the quiet hit me. Not the peaceful kind you get after a rain, but a heavy, watchful silence. No chickadees flitting overhead, no squirrels scolding from the branches, just the wind hissing through needles like a warning. I shook it off, told myself it was grief playing tricks, and kept climbing. The sun slid west faster than it had any right to, paint in the sky and bruised purples and oranges. I'd planned to turn back by 4, but the trail had other ideas. One more bend, I thought, just to the overlook where Grandpa used to sit and whittle. My legs burned, but the ache felt good, something real to anchor the hollow in my chest. Dusk was creeping in by the time I reached the overlook, a rocky outcrop jutting over the valley like a hawk's beak. The view stole my breath, layers of blue ridges folding into one another, mist pooling in the hollows like spilled milk. I set the pack down, pulled out the sandwich, and ate half while the light drained from the sky. That's when I switched on my headlamp. The beam cut a clean circle through the gloom, catching motes of dust and the occasional moth. I was packing up to head down when something flickered at the edge of the light, a soft white glow drifting between the pines, low to the ground. Not a firefly, those pulse green and lazy. Not a plane, too steady, too close. It was an orb, maybe the size of a softball, pulsating like a heartbeat, slow, deliberate, thump, 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 thump. I stood frozen, sandwich forgotten. Curiosity tugged at me harder than fear. Grandpa used to talk about lights on the ridge, will-o'-the-wisps he called them, souls too stubborn to cross over. I'd laughed then. I wasn't laughing now. I told myself it was swamp gas, a reflection, anything rational, and followed it off trail. The ground turned spongy underfoot, needles given way to moss that swallowed sound. The orb stayed just ahead, never closer, never farther, bobbing through the trees like it knew the way. My headlamp dimmed for a second. Batteries were fresh, I'd checked, and when it brightened, the light had stopped. It hovered above a structure half swallowed by the mountain, a collapsed hunting shack, boards silvered with age, roof caved in like a broken rib cage. No door, just a dark maw where one used to be. I'd hiked these trails since I could walk. Grandpa's map showed nothing here. The air changed as I neared, thicker, metallic, tasting of iron and wet earth. The orb pulsed once, brighter, then slipped inside the shack. I hesitated on the threshold. Common sense screamed to turn back, but grief is a powerful thing. It whispers that answers wait just beyond the next shadow. I stepped over the splintered sill. The floorboards groaned under my weight, rotten and slick with decades of leaf mold. My headlamp swept the interior, a rusted pot-belly stove tipped on its side, a three-legged stool, cobwebs thick as curtains. The orb hovered in the far corner, casting no shadow. Then the footsteps started, soft, deliberate, circling me on those same rotten boards. But they never creaked under anything but my own boots. I spun, beam jittering, nothing, just dust motes dancing in the light. My heart hammered so loud I felt it in my teeth. The circling stopped behind me. A voice, thin as creek ice cracking, whispered, "Little Bear." I hadn't heard that nickname since I was 6, since the summer Grandpa taught me to skip stones and promised the mountains would always keep me safe. The orb flared, white-hot, and for a heartbeat, the doorway framed a silhouette. Tall, stooped, hat brim dripping shadow like ink in water. Grandpa's hat, Grandpa's shape. I blinked, and both were gone. The shack plunged into ordinary dark. My knees buckled. I caught myself on the stove, fingers coming away black with soot. The pack on my back felt heavier, like someone had slipped a stone inside. I shrugged it off, frantic, and there it was. Grandpa's old pocket knife, the one he carried every day, blade etched with fresh scratches that spelled my name in shaky capitals, E-L-I. The letters glistened, wet. I shoved it in my pocket and ran. Branches whipped my face, roots snagged my boots, but I didn't stop until the shack was lost behind a wall of trunks. My headlamp caught the orb again, bobbing ahead like a cruel guide. It led me down switchbacks I didn't remember, over creeks swollen with spring melt. Every time I paused to catch my breath, the light waited, pulsing, thump, 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 matching my heart. The trailhead appeared sudden as a slap, gravel under the security light, my truck a dark shape beyond. I splashed through the creek without thinking. Water soaked my jeans to the knee. The orb hovered on the far bank, brighter than ever, then winked out. Just like that. Gone. I stood dripping, chest heaving, waiting for it to reappear. Minutes passed. Nothing but cricket song and the hush of water over stones. I climbed into the truck, locked the doors, and sat in the dark until my hands stopped shaking. The knife weighed heavy in my pocket. When I finally pulled it out, the scratches were gone, blade smooth as the day he gave it to me for my 10th birthday. But the weight remained. I drove back to the homestead with the windows up, radio off. Every mile convinced the orb would drift across the windshield. It didn't. The house felt too big, too empty. I slept with the knife under my pillow and woke to the smell of coffee brewing, though the pot was cold. Days blurred. I scattered Grandpa's ashes at the boulder like I'd promised, but the creek ran higher than memory, water murky and fast. The dogwood bloomed early that year, petals the color of old blood. I left Blackthorn Hollow a week later, told Mom the mountains had given me what I needed. She didn't ask questions. It's been 3 years now. I live in a city where the skyline drowns the stars, but every dusk I check the tree line from whatever window faces west. Sometimes when the light's just right, thin, slanted, the color of weak tea, I swear I see it, a soft white glow drifting between the buildings, pulsing slow. Thump, thump, thump. I haven't gone back to the ridge. I keep the knife in a drawer, blade still smooth, but every spring the handle grows warm for a day, and I smell pine and wet earth, though I'm miles from any forest. Mom says grief fades. Maybe she's right, or maybe the mountains don't let go so easy. Last week, I found a river stone on my doorstep, flat, gray, the same one I added to Grandpa's care. It wasn't there when I locked up. I haven't touched it. It sits on the sill, catching the last light before night swallows the room. And somewhere, I know, the orb waits, pulsing, calling me Little Bear. I was 19 that summer, the kind of hot that makes the air shimmer off the asphalt and turns your shirt into a second skin before you've walked 10 steps. My cousin Travis and I had been thick as thieves growing up in Harlan County, Kentucky, raised on the same back porch stories about the Noah 9 mine disaster, how the spring rains came early in '38, how the creek rose overnight and swallowed the entrance, how 37 men and boys never came out. Folks still left flowers at the boarded-up attic every Memorial Day, wilted by noon. Travis worked the parts counter at the auto shop. I was home from community college, scraping together cash for fall tuition. We spent evenings on his mama's sagging porch, drinking sweet tea gone warm, daring each other to do something stupid enough to remember when we were old. That's how the bet started. One night in Noah 9, Travis said, grinning like the devil himself, sunset to sunrise, bring a flashlight in your big boy pants. I called him Chicken. He upped the pot to $50 and a case of beer. Pride's a hell of a thing. I showed up at the mine mouth just as the sun bled out behind a ridge, scotted a color of a fresh bruise. The entrance squatted at the end of a gravel spur off Route 38, plywood nailed crooked over the timber frame, spray painted with faded warnings, danger, unstable, keep out. Kudzu had tried to claim it, green fingers curling around the boards like it wanted to pull the mountain shut. I'd brought a crowbar from Grandpa's shed, a mag light with fresh batteries, a sleeping bag, and a backpack with water, jerky, and a transistor radio that only caught static this far up the holla. Travis waited in his truck, headlights off, smoking a cigarette down to the filter. "Clock starts when you wedge that board loose," he said. "I'll be right here at dawn. Holler if you need me." I flipped him off, heart already jackhammering, and set to work. The plywood came away easier than I expected. Nails rusted through, wood soft with rot. A puff of cold air rolled out, carrying the smell of wet stone and something sharper, like old pennies. I clicked on the mag light. The beam shook across rusted, narrow-gauge tracks that disappeared into black, ties splintered and slick with moss. Graffiti scarred the timbers, initials, dates, a crude skull with 1938 scratched beneath. I stepped over the threshold, boots crunching on coal dust and broken glass. Behind me, Travis tapped the horn once, go time. Then the plywood scraped back into place. Darkness swallowed the rectangle of twilight. For a second I stood still, letting my eyes adjust, listening to water drip somewhere far off. Plink, plink, steady as a clock. I told myself it was just a night, just a dare, just $50. Then I started walking. 50 feet in, the temperature dropped hard enough to raise goose flesh on my arms. My breath plumed white in the flashlight beam. The tunnel walls closed tighter, rough-hewn rocks sweating moisture that ran in thin rivulets between the ties. I kept one hand on the right wall, feeling for side passages Grandpa warned about, old exploratory drifts that could collapse without warning. The air tasted metallic, thick at the back of my throat. My footsteps echoed funny, like the mountain was throwing them back a half-second late. I hummed an old hymn Mom used to sing, just to hear something human. The tune died quick. That's when the giggling started. High, piping, definitely a kid. It bounced off the walls, coming from everywhere and nowhere, bright as a dropped nickel. I froze. "Travis, that ain't funny," I called, voice cracking worse than I warned. No answer, just a giggle again, closer, skipping ahead down the tracks. I swept the light in a wide arc. Nothing but shadows in the glen of quartz veins. Kids sneak up here sometimes, I told myself. Teenagers looking for a thrill, same as me. Probably ducked into a side drift when they heard me coming. I yelled again, louder, "Come on out, I ain't mad." The giggle cut off mid-note. Silence rushed back in, heavier than before. Water kept dripping. Plank, plank. I waited, ears straining, then forced my feet forward. The dare was the dare. The tunnel bent left, then opened into a natural chamber, maybe 20 feet across. Support timbers sagged overhead, splintered and black with creosote. In the center, a single bare bulb hung from a frayed cord, swaying though there was no breeze. It shouldn't have worked. Power was cut decades ago, but the filament glowed dull orange, casting just enough light to turn my flashlight beam sickly yellow. I killed the mag light to save batteries and stepped closer. The bulb flickered once, twice, then steadied. That's when I saw him. A little boy stood beneath the light, maybe 7 or 8, dressed in denim overalls, faded almost white, bare feet crusted with coal dust. His hair was the color of corn silk, sticking up in tufts like he'd just rolled out of bed. He stared straight at me, head cocked, a grin too wide for his face. His eyes, Lord, his eyes, were milk white, no iris, no pupil, just cloudy orbs reflecting the bulb's glow. My stomach dropped to my boots. He raised one grimy finger to his lips. Then he pointed at the far wall. I turned slow, afraid to look away from him, but more afraid not to. Names were scratched into the rock, dozens, maybe hundreds, carved deep with something sharp. Some neat, some frantic, all dated the same week, March 14th to 20th, 1938. I knew those dates from the memorial down in town, the week the water came. My beam trembled over the letters: J. Whitaker, T. Hensley, Little Jimmy Cordeal, ages listed beside most, 42, 29, 7, the boy's age. I swallowed hard, throat dry as bone. When I turned back, he was gone. The bulb swung lazy circles, shadows stretching like fingers. But the floor, Christ, the floor was wet. Bare footprints, small and perfect, led from where he'd stood straight to the solid rock wall and stopped. I don't remember deciding to run. One second I was staring at those prints, the next I was sprinting back the way I'd come, boots slipping on the ties, shoulder clipping the wall hard enough to spin me half around. The flashlight beam jittered wild, painting the tunnel in strobe like flashes. Behind me, the giggling started again, closer, faster, a sound like breaking glass wrapped in joy. I didn't look back. The cold chased me, nipping at my heels, breath foggy and so thick I could barely see. My lungs burned. The entrance should have been right there, but the tunnel stretched longer than memory, tracks gleaming like wet snakes. I slammed into the plywood chest first, stars exploding behind my eyes. It wouldn't budge. I pounded, screamed Travis's name until my voice shredded. Then I saw the nails, bright, new, driven from the inside, heads gleaming in light. Panic is a funny thing. It sharpens some senses, dulls others. I tasted blood where I'd bitten my tongue. My fingers found the crowbar still looped through my belt. Thank God I hadn't dropped it. I wedged the flat end under the first nail, levered hard. Wood splintered, but the nail held. The giggle encircled now, high in the timbers, low by the tracks, a chorus of one. I worked faster, sweated freezing on my skin. Splinters dug deep under my nails, blood slick in the crowbar. One nail popped free, then another. The plywood sagged outward. Mountain air rushed in, pine sweet and warm. I shoved through the gap, skinning my forearms raw, and tumbled onto the gravel outside. Travis's truck was gone. Headlights, taillights, nothing. Just the moon hanging full and indifferent over the ridge. My watch read 3:17. I'd been inside less than 2 hours. The plywood lay where I'd left it. Originally, nails rusted, no sign of fresh hammer marks. I stared at my knuckles, shredded, bleeding, embedded with wood splinters the size of matchsticks. I wrapped them in my t-shirt and limped down the spur to the main road, thumb out for any passing coal truck. One finally stopped, driver half asleep, radio muttering gospel. He didn't ask questions, just dropped me at the eouring town. Doc pulled 32 splinters, stitched the worst cuts, gave me a tetanus shot, and told me to lay off the ghost stories. Travis swore he'd waited the whole night, fell asleep around 2. Woke at dawn to find the plywood pried loose and me gone. He figured I'd bailed early, pocketed the 50 anyway. We didn't speak for a year after that. I still have the scars, pale ridges across both knuckles like tally marks. Some nights, when the holler goes quiet and the crickets quit, I hear it. Faint giggling drifting up from the creek behind Mom's house. I keep the crowbar by the door now. And every spring, when the dogwoods bloom, I drive past the No 9 turnoff. The plywood's gone, replaced by a steel gate welded shut, county sign bolted on, condemned. But the kudzu grows thicker every year, and sometimes, if you look close at dusk, there's a single bare bulb glowing behind the bars, just for a second. Then it's dark again, and somewhere inside, a little boy waits with milk-white eyes and a secret he'll only share if you stay till morning. Grandma died in early November, the kind of gray morning where the mountains look bruised and the wind carries the first bite of winter. She'd lived in that cabin on Clinch Mountain her whole life, born in the back bedroom during a thunderstorm, raised 7 kids on venison and garden greens, buried my grandfather under the sugar maple out back when I was too young to remember his face. The doctor said pneumonia took her quick, but Mom swore it was loneliness. Grandpa gone 20 years, the kids scattered, the holla too quiet after the last grandbaby left for college. We held the funeral in the little Baptist church down the ridge. Folks crowd in the pews with casseroles and handkerchiefs. Then everyone caravaned up the gravel switchbacks to the cabin for coffee and pie. The will was simple. Sell the place, split the money. But the realtor said winterize first, or the pipes would burst and scare buyers off. I was between jobs, crashing on friends' couches in Knoxville, so I volunteered. Give me a week, I told Mom. I'll drain the lines, board the windows, make it neat. She hugged me like I was still 10, whispered, Don't let the mountain keep you." I laughed. The mountain had raised me every summer. I figured I knew its moods. I pulled up at dusk in my dented Civic, tires crunching on frozen mud. The cabin crouched under the pines the way it always had. Lapboard silvered with age, tin roof patched in a dozen shades of rust. Porch sagging just enough to make the rocking chair tilt forward like it was listening. That chair, oak, hand-carved by Grandpa before I was born, was Grandma's throne. She'd rock there every evening, shawl all over her shoulders, humming hymns older than the hills. I'd sit on the steps and shell peas into a tin bowl while she told stories about hints and herb signs and the time the creek ran backward. When I got older, I'd bring my sketchbook and draw her hands, knotted with arthritis, still quick with a needle. After the funeral, I'd carried the chair to the shed myself, muscles burning, because Mom said leave the porch bare for showings. The shed smelled of cedar shingles and mouse nests. I wedged the rocker between the lawnmower and a stack of flower pots, draped Grandma's lilac shawl over the armrest one last time. The wool still held her warmth. Inside, the cabin felt smaller than memory. Same pine-paneled walls, same pot-belly stove squatting in the corner, same braided rugs worn thin in the paths from kitchen to bedroom. I dropped my duffel by the couch, started a fire with the last of the kindling, and heated a can of chili on the propane stove. Wind rattled the tin roof like loose bones. I told myself it was good to be here, good to breathe air thick with wood smoke and the ghost of her cornbread. I drained the pipes methodically, opened every faucet, flushed the toilet twice, poured antifreeze down the drains until the smell stung my eyes. By 10, I was bone tired, the kind of tired that makes you thoughts soft around the edges. I unrolled my sleeping bag on the couch, left one lamp burning low, and let the wind sing me to sleep. I woke to the creak, slow, deliberate, the rhythm Grandma used when she was thinking hard. Creak, pause, creak. My eyes snapped open. The lamp stilled the load. Fire settled to embers. The sound came from the porch, steady, unhurried, the way floorboards complain under weight. I sat up, heart already tripping. I'd locked the door, deadbolt and chain, and the chair was in the shed. Still the creaking continued, back and forth, like someone settling in for a long spell. I crept to the window beside the door, breath fogging the frost on the pane. The porch light was off. Bulb must have burned out years ago, but moonlight spilled across the boards. The rocker sat exactly where it always had, empty, moving slow as a pendulum. A shawl lay draped over one armrest, lilac wool catching the silver light. I knew that shawl. I'd folded it myself, tucked it into the cedar chest in the bedroom. My hand found a doorknob, cold as iron. I didn't turn it. The rocking stopped mid-swing. Silence rushed in so complete, I heard my pulse in my ears. Then the wind picked up again, rattling the gutters, and I crawled back to the couch, convinced I'd dreamed it. Morning came thin and sharp. I brewed coffee on the camp stove, hands shaking more from cold than fear. Outside, the porch was bare. No chair, no shawl, just a dust in a snow that had blown through the slats overnight. I checked the shed. The rocker hadn't moved, shawl still draped like I'd left it. But when I lifted the wool to my face, the scent of lilac water hit me strong, fresh as if she'd dabbed it behind her ears that minute. I told myself mice had nested in the cedar chest, knocked the bottle over. Simple. I spent the day boarding windows, plywood cut to size in the shed, nails from Grandpa's coffee can. Every hammer strike echoed down the hollow. By dusk, the cabin looked blind, eyes covered, waiting for strangers to decide its worth. I built the fire high, ate peanut butter from the jar, and tried not to listen for creaking. Night 2, the wind died. The quiet pressed against the walls like a held breath. I'd fallen into that thin sleep where dreams and waking blur, when the rhythm started again, faster this time, impatient. Creak, 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 creak. I was at the window before I knew I moved. Moonlight painted the porch in blues and grays. The chair rocked hard enough to scrape the floorboards, though nothing sat in it. The shawl fluttered as if caught in a breeze that didn't touch the pines. My fingers found the deadbolt, flipped it back. The chain slid free with a soft clink. I told myself I needed proof, needed to see empty air and laugh at my own head. I opened the door. The rocking stopped the instant the latch cleared. Cold poured in, sharp enough to steal my breath. Snow had started. Fat flakes drifted lazy from a sky the color of tarnished pewter. The chair sat still, shawl pulled on the seat now. On the rail, a single handprint pressed into the fresh snow. Small, arthritis, fingers curled the way Grandma's did when her joints ached. The print faced the door, palm out, like a warning. I stepped onto the porch, boots crunching. The air smelled of pine and something sweeter, floral, lilac. The handprint began to fill, edges softening as snow settled. I looked down the steps, more prints, bare feet, small and narrow, descending into the yard, space imperfect, heading toward the family cemetery 50 yards off where the ground rose in a gentle hump. The pines parted just enough to let moonlight spill across the stones. I should have gone inside, barred the door, waited for dawn. Instead, I followed. The prints never wavered, never overlapped, cutting through the snow like they'd been laid hours earlier. My flashlight beam jittered over headstones, Grandpa's first, then Grandma's, fresh mound, still raw earth under a tarp of white. The prince stopped at her stone. Snow had already dusted the engraving. Bulow May Cottle, 1932 to 2024. Beloved wife, mother, grandmother. The stone was warm. I yanked my hand back, skin tangling. Beneath the tarp, someone had scratched letters into the frozen dirt. Rough, urgent, bring my chair home. The words glistened with melt where my breath hit them. I stood there long enough for snow to soak my jeans to the knee, long enough for the wind to pick up and whisper through the pines like a sigh. I don't remember the walk to the shed. The rocker was heavier than memory, oak biting into my palms. I dragged it across the yard, runners carving twin trenches in the snow. The porch steps groaned under the weight. I set the chair by the hearth, exactly where it used to sit, shawl draped just so. The fire had burned low. I fed it kindling until flames licked the chimney. The cabin warmed slow. I sat on the couch, staring at the rocker. It didn't move. Outside, snow kept falling, erasing the tracks, the handprint, the words. I slept with my boots on, hammer beside me like a talisman. Dawn came pale through the boarded windows. The chair hadn't rocked. The shawl smelled of lilac and wood smoke. I finished winterizing in a daze, taped the chimney flue, turned off the propane, locked the door behind me. Mom met me at the bottom of the ridge, eyes searching my face. "You okay, honey?" I nodded, handed her the keys. The realtor sold the place in February to a couple from Ohio who wanted a vacation rental. They painted the clapboard sage green, replaced the tin roof, listed it as Cozy Mountain Retreat. I drive past sometimes on my way to visit Mom. The rocker sits on the porch again, new cushions, no shawl. But every spring, when the lilacs bloom along the creek, I catch the scent on the wind miles away. And some mornings, if you walk the porch before the renters wake, the boards are warm in one spot, exactly the size of a small, arthritic hand. I don't stop anymore. I just keep driving, windows up, radio loud, trying not to hear the faint creak that follows me down the mountain. I'd been pulling doubles at the sawmill outside Jellicoe, Tennessee that fall, running the planer until my hands went numb and the smell of fresh-cut pines soaked into my skin for good. Nights blurred into one long shift of fluorescent lights and the whine of blades, but the overtime paid the rent on the trailer and kept the lights on for Mom after Dad's medical bills ate the savings. It was a Thursday in late October when the foreman let us out early. Some sensor on the big saw threw a fit, and I clocked off at 11 instead of 2. The Cumberland Plateau was already socked in with fog, the kind that rolls down off the ridges like milk poured slow, swallowing guardrails and center lines until the road feels like a tunnel with no end. I rolled the window down anyway. The cold slapped me awake and carried the scent of wet leaves and distant wood smoke. My '78 Ford rattled along Route 297, headlights cutting pale cones that died 10 feet out. Radio only caught gospel static this far up, so I let the engine do the talking. The turnoff onto Old Mill Creek Road was instinct, shorter by 20 minutes, mostly gravel, no traffic after dark. I'd driven it drunk at 17, sober at 30, and every state in between. Locals called it the Devil's Backbone for the way it hairpinned along the plateau's edge, one side mountain, the other a drop straight into nothing. Guardrail was patchy, rusted through in places, but I knew every curve. Or thought I did. The fog thickened sudden, pressing against the windshield like it wanted in. I eased off the gas, high beams useless, just a wall of white. That's when the lantern appeared. Yellow, steady, swinging gentle about head high 30 feet ahead. No silhouette, no arm, just the light, bobbing in rhythm with the road's sway. I blinked hard, figured it was a reflector or a trick of the mist, but it kept pace. I slowed to 40, it slowed. Tapped the brake to 35, it matched. When I stopped dead in the middle of the lane, tires crunching on gravel, the lantern hung still, flame dancing behind soot-streaked glass. My breath fogged the cab. Common sense said oncoming car, hunter, some idiot with a coon. But no engine noise, no crunch of boots, just the tick of my cooling motor and the soft creak of the swing. I rolled forward slow. The lantern drifted ahead, always the same distance, leading me around the next bend. Curiosity's a mean bastard. I told myself I'd follow just far enough to see who carried it, then turn around. The road narrowed, asphalt giving way to dirt and stone. Pines crowded close, branches scraping the roof like fingernails. The lantern veered right, off the shoulder, over the guardrail into the dark. I braked hard, heart kicking. That side of the road dropped 200 feet to the creek below. No path, no reason for anyone to walk there. Yet the light descended smooth, bobbing lower, inviting. I killed the engine. Silence rushed in, thick as the fog. My door creaked open, cold bit my cheeks. I left the headlights on, beams swallowed quick, and stepped onto the shoulder. Gravel shifted under my boots. The lantern waited just beyond the rail, flame steady, patient. I climbed over, metal cold through my gloves. and followed a deer path I'd never noticed, narrow and switchbacking down the slope. Rhododendrons slapped my face, roots snagged my ankles. The lantern stayed ahead, never closer, never farther, leading me deeper than the grade should allow. My breath plumed white, sweat chilled against my back. 10 minutes in, the ground leveled unexpected. Fog parted just enough to show a clearing maybe 30 yards wide, ringed by laurel thick as walls. In the center sat a pickup truck, rusted the color of dried blood, half buried in kudzu. Ford, same year as mine, same dents along the fender. My stomach flipped. Uncle Ray's truck, missing since the summer of '89, when he drove up here to clear his head after Aunt Clara left him. Search parties found nothing but an empty beer can and tire tracks that ended at the guardrail. Everyone figured he'd gone over the edge, body lost in the ravine. But here it was, vines threaded through the grill, windshield spiderwebbed, driver door hanging open on one hinge. The lantern hovered above the hood, flame bright enough to gild the rust. I stepped closer, boots sinking in mud. The cab light was on, impossible, battery long dead, cast in a weak glow over cracked vinyl. The seatbelt hung buckled, stretched across empty air, tongue still latched. No bones, no clothes, just the belt holding space where a man should have been. A smell rolled out, stale beer, wet earth, something coppery underneath. My keys were gone from my pocket. I patted frantically, jeans, jacket, nothing. Then I saw them on the dash, arranged carefully in a row. Ignition, house, padlock, all laid out to spell L-E-A-V in block letters. The lantern blinked once, hard like a camera flash. Darkness swallowed everything. I ran blind, branches whipping my face, breath sawing in my throat. The path had vanished. I crashed uphill through brush, thorns tearing my sleeves. My truck's headlights glowed faint above the ridge, a beacon. I scrambled over the guardrail, skinning my palms, and drove into the cab. Keys, my keys, sat in the ignition where I'd left them. The others, the ones from the dash, were gone. I fired the engine, slammed it into gear, and peeled out. Fog still clung thick, but the road felt solid under the tires. I didn't slow until the plateau flattened and the mist thinned to ribbons. In the rear view, miles behind, the lantern swung steady along the shoulder, keeping pace though I pushed 80. It followed until the road widened and sodium lights from the interstate flickered ahead. Then it winked out. I pulled in to the first truck stop, hands shaking so bad I could barely work the pump. The attendant, half asleep, didn't notice the blood on my knuckles or the mud caked to my boots. I washed in the sink, water running pink, and stared at my reflection until the shake ceased. Uncle Ray's truck stayed buried in my head, seatbelt buckled around nothing, keys spelling a warning. I drove home slow, windows up, radio off. Mom was asleep when I let myself in, trailer quiet except the hum of the fridge. I checked every lock twice, then sat at the kitchen table with the lights on until dawn. The next morning I called the sheriff's office, voice steady as I could manage. Told him about the truck, the location, left out the lantern. Deputy took my statement, said they'd send someone up. 2 days later they called back. No truck, no clearing, just a deer path that ended at the drop-off. Fog must have played tricks, they said. Case closed since '89 anyway. I hung up and stared at the scars on my palms, thin white lines where the guardrail bit. They itch when storms roll in from the west. It's been 8 years. I don't drive the backbone anymore, take the long way even when it adds an hour. But some nights, when the fog creeps down off the plateau and wraps the trailer tight, I hear it, a soft creak of metal on metal, like a door hanging open in the wind. And if I look out the window quick enough, there's a yellow glow swinging slow along the fence line, 30 feet out, waiting. I keep the curtains drawn now. The spare keys stay on a hook by the door, never in my pocket after dark. And every October, without fail, I wake to find one key missing from the ring. Just one. Always the ignition. I find it days later on the dashboard of my truck, cold to the touch, pointing toward the mountains. I was 24 and flat broke that summer, scraping by on barista tips and the occasional graphic design gig that paid in exposure. When Professor Hale from the university posted on the department board looking for a house sitter, 3 weeks in the Smoky Mountains, cash under the table, no questions, I jumped. He was retiring early, heading to some conference in Scotland, needed someone to water plants, feed the cat, keep vandals out. The pay was enough to cover rent for 2 months. I met him at his office, all tweedied and pipe smoke, and he handed me a ring of old keys and a hand-drawn map to the cabin deep in Cades Cove. "Mind the storms," he said, eyes crinkling behind wire rims. "The ridge gets ideas when the weather turns." I laughed, figured he meant lightning. The drive up took 4 hours on roads that narrowed to gravel, then dirt. Pines pressing so close the Civic scraped bark. The cabin sat in a hollow cupped by laurel thickets, 2 stories of log and stone, chimney crooked like a broken finger. A black cat, Whiskey, met me at the door, tail high, then vanished into the underbrush. Inside smelled of cedar and old books. Living room stacked with shelves, a stone hearth big enough to stand in, stairs creaking under carpet worn thin. Kitchen had a propane stove and a fridge that hummed like a distant chainsaw. Upstairs, 2 bedrooms, a bath with clawfoot tub, and a narrow door at the hall's end leading to the attic. Professor Hale's instructions were taped to the fridge. Feed Whiskey twice daily, don't let him out after dark, check the generator if power flickers, avoid the ridge trail behind the house. No explanation. I unpacked my duffel, set up my laptop on the oak table, and spent the first afternoon sketching logos for a client who'd never pay. Thunder growled over the mountains by dusk, the kind that rolls down the slopes and shakes the windows in their frames. I grilled a burger on the stove, opened a beer, and watched rain lash the glass. Whiskey curled on the couch, purring like a motor. Lightning flashed white, illuminating the hollow for a heartbeat. That's when I saw the ridge. It rose sharp behind the cabin, a spine of rock and scrub no map acknowledged, not the topo I'd printed, not the trail guide in the drawer. The attic window faced it dead on, a small diamond pane set high in the gable. Another flash, and I saw her. Pale dress clinging to thin frame, hair black as wet coal whipping in the wind, standing at the ridge's crest, staring down. The distance was maybe 200 yards, but her face, pale, hollow-cheeked, felt close enough to touch. Thunder cracked, darkness swallowed her. I stood frozen, beer forgotten. Whiskey's ears flattened. When the next bolt lit the sky, the ridge was empty, just rock and stunted pines swaying. I told myself heat lightning, trick of light, some camper in costume. But the hairs on my arms wouldn't lie down. I checked the attic anyway. The door stuck, wood swollen with humidity. I shouldered it open. Stairs climbed steep into gloom, threads groaning. My phone flashlight cut a weak path over trunks bound with leather straps, a dressmaker's dummy draped in yellowed lace, boxes labeled in spidery ink, Elizabeth, 1942, letters, photographs. Dust, thick enough to write in, coated everything. The window was filmed with grime, but when I wiped a circle clear, the ridge stared back, empty, ordinary. No sign of a woman or dress. Wind rattled the pane. I flinched hard enough to drop the phone. It clattered down the steps, screen cracking. Whiskey watched from the hallway, tail lashing. I boarded the attic door with a chair under the knob and slept with the bedroom light on, rain drumming the tin roof like impatient fingers. The second storm came 2 nights later, fiercer, wind screaming through the eaves. Power flickered once, twice, then died with a pop from the breaker box. I lit candles, beeswax thick as my wrist, found in a drawer. The cabin felt bigger in the dark, corners pooling shadow. Thunder shook the floorboards. I was in the kitchen heating soup when lightning strobed again, brighter than daylight. She was closer. Not on the ridge, halfway down the slope, dress plastered to her legs, hair a black flag. Her face pressed the attic window from outside, forehead almost touching glass, though the drop from the eaves was 20 feet. Candlelight flickered across her cheeks, hollow and wet. She didn't blink. I dropped the spoon. It clattered loud as a gunshot. Whiskey hissed and bolted under the couch. Another flash, she was gone, but frost spiderwebbed the pane where her breath had hit, perfect circles blooming outward. I grabbed the hammer from the tool drawer, nails from a coffee can labeled Misk. The attic stairs loomed darker than before. I climbed slow, candle guttering, hammer heavy in my fist. The window was intact, no sign of entry, but the frost circles remained, edges sharp as etched glass. I nailed plywood over the pane, 4 boards, 2 nails each, pounding until my shoulders burned. Dust sifted from the rafters with every stroke. When I descended, the candle had burned halfway down, wax pooling like blood. I wedged the chair under the knob again, added a trunk for weight, and sat on the couch with the hammer across my lap until dawn. Birds chirped, power hummed back on. The attic boards were still nailed tight, but the frost circles had melted into runnels that spelled a single word on the sill: help. Morning light made the night feel foolish. I brewed coffee, fed whiskey, and tried to work. The client emailed, logo needed changes, deadline tomorrow. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. Rain started again by noon, soft and steady. I checked the attic mid-afternoon. The plywood sagged outward, nails popped clean like they'd been pulled from inside. The window was bare, ridge beyond it shrouded in mist. I re-nailed the boards, used every nail in the can, and dragged the heaviest trunk across the floor to block the stairs. Whiskey refused to enter the hallway, fur puffed, eyes fixed on the attic door. That night the storm returned worse than before. Wind howling like a living thing, rain slashing sideways. Power failed at midnight. I lit the last candle, its flame trembling though the air was still. I don't know what pulled me upstairs. Maybe the need to prove it was nothing, maybe something worse. The trunk had moved 6 inches, no scratches on the floor. The chair lay on its side. Candle in one hand, hammer in the other. I climbed. The attic smelled of ozone and wet stone. The plywood lay stacked neat as kindling beside the window. She stood on the other side of the glass, inches away, dress dripping though no rain touched the pane. Her breath fogged the glass in perfect circles, one after another, deliberate. Her eyes were black pits, but sorrow lived there, deep as well water. She raised her hand, palm flat against the glass, fingers splayed. The candle flame bowed towards her. I mirrored without thinking, palm to palm, glass cold as a grave between us. Ice spread from her touch, racing across the pane, up my arm. My bones ached with it. The candle showed words forming in the frost, letter by letter. He locks us both. I jerked away, candle snuffing out. Darkness swallowed everything. Her outline lingered in afterimage, burned on my retinas. I stumbled down the stairs, hammer clattering, and sat on the couch until Professor Hale's headlights cut the dawn. He found me there, shivering though the fire had burned itself to ash, family photos on the mantel turned face down. He didn't ask why, just handed me an envelope thick with cash and said the trip was cut short. I drove down the mountain with the windows fogged, heater blasting, her palm print still tingling against mine. Whiskey watched from the porch as I left, tail low. It's been 5 years. I finished the degree, moved to Nashville, design jobs that pay real money. But every time the temperature drops sudden, elevator AC, walk-in freezer, first frost, I feel her hand against mine, cold, seeping bone deep. I looked up Professor Hale once, found an obituary dated a month after I left. Heart attack, alone in the cabin. The university sold the place to a developer, 5 stars, rustic charm. Guests post photos of the attic window, complain about cold spots, strange frost patterns in summer. I keep the hammer in my trunk, and some nights, when storms roll in from the west, I wake to find my bedroom window fogged from the inside, perfect circles blooming one by one. I don't wipe them away. I know what they'll spell. I'd been needing to get away from months, the kind of away where cell service dies and the only voices are your own thoughts rattling around too loud. Work had chewed me up, endless spreadsheets, a boss who scheduled meetings at 7 a.m. on Saturdays, the slow realization that 29 was creeping toward 30 and I still lived in a studio apartment that smelled of takeout and regret. So when a long weekend popped up in early September, I threw my camping gear in the trunk and drove east until the Smokies swallowed the highway. Devil's Bathtub was the destination, a sinkhole pool fed by a waterfall tucked in a side trail off the Appalachian Trail near the Virginia-Tennessee line. I'd hiked it once in college with friends who drank too much and left trash. This time, I wanted it alone. The ranger at the station raised an eyebrow when I signed the solo permit, but stamped it anyway. "Watch the water levels," he said. "Flash floods come quick." I nodded, already tasting pine air. The trail in was 4 miles of switchbacks and creek crossings, boots squishing over mossy rocks, the smell of wet earth thick enough to chew. Goldenrod nodded along the path, and once a doe stepped out 20 feet ahead, stared until I lowered my gaze, then vanished into the laurel. By late afternoon, I found the clearing, flat ground ringed by hemlock, the bathtub itself a turquoise bowl carved into limestone, waterfall whispering constant. No one else. Perfect. I pitched my tent on a rise above the pool, gathered deadfall for a small fire, and ate rehydrated chili while the sun bled out behind the ridge. Crickets started their nightly sawing. An owl called once, far off. I crawled into the tent around 10, sleeping bag zipped to my chin, the hush of water lulling me under. I woke at 3:07 a.m., phone screen glowing the time, heart already racing, though I couldn't say why. The waterfall still murmured, but beneath it layered voices, dozens, maybe more, singing soft and low. A hymn I half remembered from childhood, the little white church Grandma dragged me to every Sunday until I was old enough to fake stomach aches. "Shall we gather at the river?" The notes rising and falling in perfect 4-part harmony, women's altos weaving through men's baritones like smoke. I lay still, ears straining. No tents nearby. I'd checked the clearing twice. No cabins for miles according to the map. Just the forest and me. The singing grew clearer, closer, drifting up from the creek bed below the pool. I unzipped the tent slow, cool air kissing my face. Moonlight silvered everything, turning the water to mercury. The voices never wavered. No coughs, no missed cues, just that steady, aching beauty. I should have stayed put. Instead, I pulled on boots without lacing them, grabbed my headlamp but left it off. Didn't want to spook whatever choir practiced in the dark. The path down to the creek was slick with dew. I kept one hand on trunks for balance. The singing pulled me like a tether, notes curling around my ribs. I reached the water's edge, where the pool drained into a narrow run, moonlight spilling across the surface. There they were, silhouettes on the far bank, shoulder to shoulder in the shallows, water lapping their knees. Maybe 30, 40 figures, still as statues, faces tilted toward the sky. Dresses and shirts clung dark with wet, hair plastered to skulls. Their mouths moved in unison, but the sound came from everywhere. Trees, rocks, the air itself. Like the hollow was the instrument, and they were only the players. I stepped into the creek without thinking. Water soaked my jeans to the ankle, cold enough to sting. One step, two. The singing swelled, wrapping me warm despite the chill. The figures never turned, never acknowledged me. I was 10 feet away when the water around my boots changed, warm, then hot, like stepping into a bath drawn too long. Steam rose faint in the moonlight. My skin prickled. I froze. One singer pivoted slow, water swirling around thin legs. Where eyes should have been, only smooth skin, pale and seamless, no sockets, no lashes. The mouth kept forming words, voice blending perfect with the rest. The hymn hit a high note that vibrated in my teeth. I stumbled back, boot heel slipping on moss. The hot water followed, licking my calves. More heads turned, smooth faces, mouths open in song. The sound now inside my skull. I ran. Creek stones shifted underfoot, water splashing high. Behind me the singing chased, notes stretching longer, souring off key. I scrambled up the bank, branches whipping my cheeks, breath sawing raw. The tent appeared sudden in the moonlight, nylon glowing like a ghost. I dove inside, zipped the door with shaking fingers, and sat hugging my knees while the hymn circled the clearing, closer, then farther, then close again. It went on for hours or minutes, time smeared. Eventually it faded, leaving only the waterfall and my pulse. I didn't sleep. Dawn came pale through the trees. I crawled out stiff, expecting chaos, trampled grass, footprints everywhere. The site was untouched. Fire rang cold, food bags still hung from the bear cable. But around the tent, pressed deep in the soft earth, circled bare footprints, child-sized, narrow, toes splayed like they'd never worn shoes. Dozens of them, perfect ovals, leading from the creek into the woods on the far side, and never out. No return trail. I followed them 20 yards. They stopped at a wall of rhododendron, ground undisturbed beyond. My boots were dry inside, socks crusted with creek mud. The water in the pool ran clear and cold again. I broke camp fast, stuffing gear any way, tent half collapsed. The drive out was a blur, gravel roads, then pavement, radio off, because every station I tried played the same hymn, voices slightly off, like a recording slowed to hair. I rolled the windows down, let the wind scour my face. By the time I hit the interstate, the music had stopped, replaced by ads in country twang. I told myself it was a dream, a prank, carbon monoxide from the stove. But the footprints stayed sharp in my memory. And when I got home, I found creek mud flaked across the passenger seat, though I'd driven alone. It's been 2 years. I camped still, but never solo, never near water after dark. Some nights, the hymn creeps into my dreams, soft at first, then swelling until I wake gasping. Last month I hiked a different trail with friends, daylight the whole way. We passed the creek at dusk, and for a heartbeat, the water steamed, though the air was 40 degrees. No one else noticed. I feel the circle of footprints every time I close my eyes, child-sized, leading into the green and never out. And sometimes, driving home late, the radio flickers to static. Then that same 4-part harmony, voices coming from everywhere and nowhere, calling me back to the hollow to gather at the river. I keep the volume low now, just in case. I was 31 when I signed on to help restore the old fire tower on Rowan Mountain, the kind of gig that paid in blisters and bragging rights, but kept me out of the city where rent was eating my savings alive. The Forest Service needed volunteers with basic carpentry, replace rotten decking, patch the roof, make it safe for hikers again. I'd grown up swinging a hammer on my dad's job sites in Johnson City, so the work felt like home. The tower sat at 6,200 feet, a steel skeleton with a cab on top like a birdhouse for giants, stairs spiraling up the ridge in a dizzy climb. Base camp was a trailer 6 miles down the service road. Most folks drove out at dusk. I figured I'd save the gas in the hour commute, bunk in the cab, cook on a camp stove, watch stars punch holes in the sky. The ranger who briefed us, a wiry guy named Pike, handed me a key ring heavy as sin. "Lock the hatch every night," he said. "Bears get ideas." I nodded, already tasting the solitude. The first day was all sweat and splinters. I hauled pressure-treated lumber up the stairs in a sling over my shoulder, knees burning by the 10th trip. The view from the catwalk stole what breath I had left. Layers of blue ridges folding into North Carolina. Hawks ride in thermals like they own the air. The cab was 12 by 12, windows filmed with decades of grime, chart table bolted to the floor, a cot frame rusted but solid. I swept out mouse nests, strung a tarp for a door, and set up my sleeping bag. Radio check with bass crackled clear. Sunset painted the sky in fire. I ate ramen watching the light drain from the valleys. Night came quick at altitude, cold seeping through the floorboards. I locked the hatch, wedged a 2x4 under the handle for good measure, and slept hard. Day 2 blurred into day 3, pry bars, nail guns, the rhythmic thunk of hammer on wood. My hands blistered, then calloused over. The isolation settled comfortable, no voices but the wind and the occasional raven croak. Third evening I finished patching the roof, tar smell thick in my nose. I glassed the horizon with the binoculars Pipe left, habit from Dad's hunting trips. The catwalk below was empty, stairs clear to the ground. I radioed base for the nightly check-in. Static answered, thick and white. I tried again, nothing. Figured sunspots or the ridge blocking signal. I'd report in the morning. I heated chili on the stove, cracked a beer, and leaned back in the folding chair I'd hauled up. The mountain went quiet, the kind of quiet that rings in your ears. That's when I saw him. Binoculars to my eyes, sweeping the catwalk out of boredom. A figure paced the far side, tall, stooped, coat the deep blue of old photographs, brass buttons catching the last light. Kepi hat low over the brow. He moved deliberate, boots silent on the grating, though I should have heard every step. My stomach dropped. The hatch was locked from inside. I'd checked twice. I lowered the glasses, rubbed my eyes, looked again. He was closer, pacing toward the stairs, musket slung across his chest like a yoke. The face, Lord, the face, was eaten by shadow. No features, just a void where eyes and mouth should be. I grabbed the radio. "Pike, you copy? Intruder on the tower." Static hissed back, louder. I set the binoculars down slow, afraid to spook him. When I looked out the window bare-eyed, The catwalk was empty. I didn't sleep. I sat with the hammer across my lap, staring at the hatch. Wind moaned through the steel, but no footsteps climbed the stairs. Dawn came gray and slow. I unbarred the door, descended with the radio in one hand, hammer in the other. The catwalk showed no prints in the dew, no scuffs on the fresh decking. Bass finally answered. Pike's voice, calm, said my radio must have glitched. I told him about the figure. Long pause. Heat stroke plays tricks, he said. Drink water. I let it go. The day's work waited. That evening I glassed the ridge again, routine now. The soldier stood at the base of the stairs, exactly where the ground met the first riser. Union blue crisp despite the distance, musket held easy. The shadow face tilted up toward the cab. He raised one gloved hand, slow, deliberate, and pointed east toward a fold in the mountain I'd never noticed, a ravine hidden by a stand of Fraser fir. I radioed Bass, static again. The soldier didn't move, just pointing, arms steady as iron. I watched until full dark swallowed him. The hatch stayed locked, but I wedged the chair under it anyway. I hiked east at first light, following the ridgeline until the ground dipped sharp into the ravine. Laurel thickets clawed my sleeves, the air turned damp and still. The ravine bottom was a tangle of rhododendron and blowdowns, but there, half buried in moss and leaf mold, a line of stones, 20 maybe, laid end to end like a crude wall. Flat river rocks, some cracked, edges softened by lichen. I brushed one clear with my glove. Faint carving, 1863. Another, J. McCollin. Dates too worn to read fully, but the year repeated. No crosses, no names complete. A cemetery, unmarked, forgotten. My skin crawled. I snapped photos with my phone, marked the GPS, and climbed out fast. Radio worked fine once I cleared the trees. I reported the find to Pike, coordinates, description. He went quiet again. No record of burials up there, he said finally. Probably survey markers. We'll check it. I hung up, uneasy. That night I barred the hatch early, built the stove fire high though the cold wasn't bad. I was cleaning tools when the door creaked, slow, like someone testing the weight. Another creak, then silence. I waited, hammer ready, until my hands cramped. Nothing more. I dozed in the chair, woke to the stove popped cold. Moonlight spilled through the east window, silvering the chart table. He sat there, soldier straight, musket across his lap, shadow face turned toward me. The kepi brim dripped darkness like ink. He didn't speak, didn't move, but the air tasted of gunpowder and wet earth. I couldn't breathe. He reached into his coat slow, pulled something small, and set it on the table. A button, brass, tarnished green, U.S. infantry stamped around an eagle, 1863. He placed it in my palm, though I never offered my hand. The metal burned cold. Then he was gone, chair empty, no scent, no sound. I left at first light, packed gear in a daze, descended the stairs 2 at a time. The ravine stones were where I'd left them, but the moss looked disturbed, like something had knelt there. Pike met me at base camp, face unreadable. "Towers condemned," he said, "coming down next week for safety." I asked about the graves. He shrugged. "Geological survey, probably. Happens." I handed him the button. He turned it over, frowned, gave it back. "Souvenir," he muttered. The demolition crew arrived Monday. Torches, cranes, the tower folded like paper. I watched from the parking lot until the cab hit the ground with a clang that echoed for miles. It's been 4 years. I keep the button in a tin on my desk next to bills and takeout menus. Most days it's just metal, cold and dull. But when storms roll in from the east, thunder growling over the ridges, wind smelling of rain and pine, the button warms against my fingers, steady as a heartbeat. I looked up Rowan Mountains once. Civil War skirmishes, deserters, a field hospital lost to time. Nothing official. The ravine's gone now, filled for a new trail. But some nights I dream the stairs again, climbing endless, the cab waiting with its single chair and the shadow-faced man pointing east. I wake with the button clenched in my fist, palm branded. And out the window, if the clouds part just right, I swear I see a flicker of blue on the ridge where the tower used to stand. Pacing slow, musket across chest, waiting for someone to follow where the stones still sleep.